Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 496th episode, we have 3 new dinosaurs to talk about in the news.
All right.
I've got a theropod.
There's also another theropod and a sauropod.
Mine is a close relative to Carnotaurus.
With the tiny arms?
Probably. They didn't find the arms. They found some pretty good legs to go with it.
Oh.
And some of the skull. But more about that later. We also have dinosaur of the day, Mahakala.
A goose-like theropod.
Goose-like, huh?
Mm-hmm.
But not an actual goose, because geese are goose-like theropods.
Oh, good point.
And I have a fun fact, which is that there are 3 different dinosaur days.
That ties in nicely because on Saturday, June 1st, we're doing a live stream with Dinosaurs Will Always Be Awesome, Common Descent Podcast, and Weird and Dead Podcast to celebrate Dinosaur Day.
One of the dinosaur days.
Right, the June 1st one.
Also known as National Dinosaur Day.
Yes, and if you want to join us in our live stream, because we're going to be playing games and watching some live fossil prep and a lot of other fun stuff, then head over to bit.ly/DinoDay24. That's all lowercase, one word, Dino, D-I-N-O, Day 24.
And I think there's a couple questions you can answer beforehand to get us ready for some games we're going to play during the live stream.
Yes. All right, before we get into all of our exciting new dinosaur news, we just want to take a moment to thank all of our patrons and the patrons who were randomly selected to thank this episode are Quadrosaurus, James Pasco, Albertosaurus, Kentrosaurus, David, Daniel McGill, Wouter, Ray, Buffy, and Cynthia. So thank you for being a Dino-it-all with us.
Yeah, and if you want to join our Dino Day celebration, you're more than welcome to. Everybody is.
Mm-hmm. It's a free event.
Yes. And if you'd like to help us create the podcast and live stream events like Dino Day, consider joining our Patreon, patreon.com/iknowdino. Jumping into the news, I've got a new abelosaurid dinosaur. This one was published in Cladistics by Diego Pol and others. Abelosaurids are mostly medium-sized bipedal predators. I think some of them are actually fairly small. I'd say small to medium. They're generally from South America, Africa, and southwestern Europe, which is sort of a strange combination of places. A lot of times animals are from Gondwana, and that would include Antarctica and Australia. But as far as we know, we haven't found any abelosaurids yet from those places. But there are some in Europe, so it's interesting. The most famous abelosaurid is Carnotaurus. That's the meat bull dinosaur with ferocious horns and hilariously tiny arms.
More hilariously tiny than T-Rex.
Much more hilariously tiny and less useful, although very flexible in the shoulder for some reason. Unknown reason. This new dinosaur is named Koleken. And like Carnotaurus, Koleken is from the La Colonia Formation in Argentina. Since it's from the same formation as Carnotaurus, that means that it may have lived together with Carnotaurus in Patagonia about 72 million years ago, which is in the latest Cretaceous. They didn't give a size or weight estimate for Koleken, but its femur is 56.2 centimeters long, or about 1 foot 10 inches, which is about 2 inches longer than the average human newborn. If you want something for scale.
Sounds large.
It is pretty big. Meanwhile, Carnotaurus had a femur that is 103 centimeters or 3 foot 4 inches.
Much larger.
Yeah, that's about twice as big. That, for comparison, is about the height of a 4-year-old human. But that's just one bone, just the upper leg bone, as tall as an entire 4-year-old human, not the 4-year-old human's leg bone. Maybe more relevant is that Carnotaurus femur is not quite twice as long as Koleken. So Koleken was certainly much smaller, although also probably much younger, which makes it much harder to compare the overall size when you're comparing an adult to a subadult.
Oh, I see. The individual found is much younger than the individuals of Carnotaurus found.
Yeah, specifically the one individual of Carnotaurus. The full name of Koleken is Koleken inakayali, and Koleken is, quote, adapted from Koleken, or Koleken, a name in Taotian language spoken by the native population of central Patagonia that means coming from clay and water, given the specimen was found in a sedimentary section dominated by claystone representing an estuarine environment, end quote. So in other words, it was found in a clay, so they named it after
Clay and water.
clay and water. Yep. Then the species name, Inakayali, is, quote, honoring Inakayal, one of the last chiefs of the Tehuelches, native people from central Patagonia. He is known for his resistance against Argentina's conquest of the desert military campaign, which resulted in the decimation and displacement of native communities from Patagonia. After his capture and eventual death in 1888, Inakayal's skeleton was stored at the La Plata Museum Anthropology Collection, but in 1994 his skeleton was respectfully restituted in its native place and buried by his people near the town of Teca in central Patagonia, which is in the Chubut province, Argentina, end quote. Pretty long explanations of the genus and species on this one, but also very interesting and meaningful. In Patagonia, the Tehuelche people were south of the Tay Ocean, and that conquest of the desert that they mentioned was really a horrible campaign, generally considered a genocide today.
Ooh.
So the fact that Inakayal resisted it and helped keep his people from suffering a really terrible fate is extremely significant. And unfortunately, that conquest of the desert led to the complete annihilation of the Taotian people, so they are considered extinct today. The Taotian language may have gone extinct about 75 years ago with the last of the people. However, there are reportedly some Tehuelche people who spoke Taotian, and the languages are really closely related.
Nice.
So there might still be some people who speak it. A lot of sources say that it may be extinct, the Taotian language, because the Tehuelche people, there are still over 20,000 people in that group. So that language is alive and well compared to Taotian. I found one Spanish Taotian dictionary from the Endangered Language Project, and that might be the same source that the authors of this paper used because it lists that Koleken word with the same definition, meaning coming from water and clay. I also think there's something really fitting about using extinct languages for extinct animals, because the animals can kind of remind us of the people who also went extinct and vice versa. Because I certainly wouldn't know about the Taotian people if it wasn't for this dinosaur being named after them. And it's an important part of history.
Yeah.
So back to the dinosaur, Koleken. The holotype is actually pretty good. It's got 8 back vertebrae, which is most of the back vertebrae. It also has the hips and all of the vertebrae between the hips, aka a complete sacrum. It also has about 8 tail vertebrae and nearly complete hind limbs, including from the top of the hips and that sacrum all the way down the legs and through the feet and into the toe claws. It even has a couple of. So that's the main part of the dinosaur that is preserved. The back, the tail, and then the hind limbs are in great shape. There are several bones from the skull, but unfortunately the skull bones are in pretty rough shape compared to what we have in the vertebrae and the limb bones. And we don't have the arms, unfortunately. One of the skull bones we have is the maxilla, which is sort of the upper part of the snout. It has the top teeth in it, usually. I don't think this one actually has any teeth in it. And it's also broken into several pieces that look like they've taken a lot of abuse since fossilizing.
Like some crushing, maybe?
It's more just like really worn around the edges. So it's one of those things where they put the pieces back together. They've got about 6 big pieces, and they're just so worn on the edges that they don't even fit that well together, even when they're lined up carefully. There's also a couple bits from the top of the head, which notably are missing the impressive Carnotaurus horns. And we have the part of the head that should have the Carnotaurus horns if it did have those horns. So we don't think it had horns.
But you mentioned it was a subadult. Could that be why?
Yeah, it could be. So there are 6 lines of arrested growth in the leg bone, meaning that it lived through at least 6 winters. Presumably in the winter, there was less food available, which slowed down the growth of their bones. And you can actually see that in the bones. We talk about that sometimes, the lags, just like tree rings. And since there are 6 of those lines, that means that it was at least 6 years old. Although the bone is hollow, so there could be another lag or 2 or 3 or more missing in that space. But based on the type of bone, it seems that Koleken wasn't even sexually mature, let alone an adult when it died. So they call it a subadult, and they gave it a minimum age of 6 years. So they don't think there's good evidence for there even being one more lag inside that space, which is pretty young, 6 years for a large dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
Koleken has many features in common with Carnotaurus. So, yes, the obvious question is Koleken just a young Carnotaurus that hadn't grown its horns yet, possibly making Koleken a juvenile Carnotaurus, just like how a lot of people think Nanotyrannus could be a juvenile T-Rex. Although the jury is still out on that, just for the record.
So another debate could be brewing.
It could be, but the authors don't think so, even though Carnotaurus was significantly older. I couldn't find histology on Carnotaurus where they counted the lags, but a study of a Carnotaurus brain case found that it was fused and therefore an adult, which again, so it could be possible that Koleken would have grown horns later. But we really don't know how or when abelisaurids grew their horns, since most abelisaurids are only known from one individual.
Yeah, that makes it hard to know as a group what was going on.
Yeah, and whether or not those horns grew later in life, or if there would have been at least something there on a 6-year-old, because in some other dinosaurs and modern animals, they often grow their horns once they reach sexual maturity, which we don't think Koleken had reached. So it could be possible that Koleken was going to grow horns later. But in other animals, they have smaller horns or even medium-sized horns before they're sexually mature. So that's a possibility. But more important is there are other differences in the animal that are significantly different from Carnotaurus that seem to show that they're not the same genus. Just one example of the differences, on Koleken, there is a crest on the side of the snout, specifically on the nasal, and Carnotaurus doesn't have a crest there, but instead has sort of random bumps. And that's not the type of thing you would expect to see changing, having a crest on a juvenile that sort of changes into random bumps as it gets older.
Mm-hmm.
In the evolutionary tree analysis, Koleken came out in a group with Carnotaurus, Niebla, and Aucasaurus. Koleken is the youngest at about 6 years, Niebla is about 9 years old, and Aucasaurus is about 11 years old. And I don't think anyone has sliced into a Carnotaurus leg yet to get a count of the rings in the bone, but it is considered an adult, so...
Because of those fusions.
Yes, in the skull. So I guess if you're thinking about Koleken, you can think of it as a smaller Carnotaurus type animal without horns, which really just makes it a lot like Aucasaurus. But we really don't know how big it would have been since we're working with juvenile material here.
Right.
And it was still really rapidly growing based on the spacing of those rings.
So it could have gotten much bigger.
Yeah, potentially. Like, we just really don't know.
Just think of it as a ferocious carnivore with tiny arms.
Yes. I mean, it would have been ferocious compared to a human.
Mm-hmm.
Just maybe not compared to a Carnotaurus.
Right. But I've got the human point of view going. And we'll get into our next couple of dinosaurs in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. All right, as promised, we've got 2 new theropods to talk about. And this next one is a new noasaurid theropod, Kiyacursor longipes. This was published by Alexander Averianov and others in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B. I like the title of this paper. It's The Last Ceratosaur of Asia. Dun, dun, dun.
Because it was in the Late Cretaceous?
It was in the early Cretaceous, but that's late for Asia.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because that abelisaur I was just talking about, Koleken, is from the very Late Cretaceous, and that's also a ceratosaur. But it's in South America, where there's a lot more ceratosaurs.
This dinosaur is closely related to the abelosaurids, but it's not an abelosaurid, it's a noasaurid, which they're all part of Ceratosauria. And noasaurids are an interesting group. They include dinosaurs like Mahakala, which is known for its long, sharp teeth and that downturned jaw, and maybe the teeth were sticking out. At least that's how it's sometimes portrayed. But then there's also Lemusaurus, which lost all of its teeth as an adult.
Yeah, for some reason that's what I think of with noasaurids, maybe because it's the weirdest one.
Mahakala would be really weird if it turned out that its teeth were sticking out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, noasaurids, they walked on two legs, they had long tails and short arms. For this new noasaurid, Kiyacursor, they found a fragmentary skeleton including neck and tail bones, parts of the ribs and shoulders, parts of the arms, and parts of the legs. There was also another neck vertebra that was found a few years earlier that has now been referred to Kiyacursor. It was a medium-sized noasaurid, estimated to be about 2.5 meters or over 8 feet long. And they cut open the bone, so they did some histology there, and found up to 4 lags, those lines of arrested growth that you were talking about earlier, Garrett. So this individual was more than 3 years old, but it was still growing because, like Koleken, it was a subadult.
Yeah, 3 years old is pretty young.
It did have long legs and probably was a decent runner, and it had this ostrich-like foot with a large third metatarsal, that's a foot bone, and a small second metatarsal. One key difference, though, is that it had 3 toes, whereas ostriches have 2 toes on each foot.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a difference. The full name Kiyacursor longipes means long-legged Kia river runner. And Kiyacursor lived, like I said, in the early Cretaceous in what is now western Siberia and Russia, in the Late Formation. It's the first ceratosaur from the early Cretaceous in what's now Asia, and it shows that there were ceratosaurs 40 million years later in Asia than we previously thought. So that's pretty cool. It extends that lineage there.
Yeah. 40 million years is a long chunk of time.
So what's really interesting is other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place. They include Psittacosaurus, the sauropod Siberotitan, as well as a lot of indeterminate dinosaurs like theropods, sauropods, stegosaurs, and a lot of other animals, including birds, pterosaurs, crocodilomorphs, turtles, lizards, mammaliaforms, and amphibians. And in this ecosystem, there's a lot of what they're calling Jurassic relics, because these are animals mostly known from the Jurassic. So there was something about this area that made it possible for them to extend their lineages. I think one of the authors called it a real Jurassic Park.
Oh, I see, because it's a bunch of stuff from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find.
Yes.
Where did those dinosaurs come from? Was somebody getting mosquito DNA?
I don't think so. I think
the
they
Cretaceous?
Just happened to be living at the right time
They
or the
weren't-
right place.
The dinosaurs weren't doing science and genetic modifying each other to make new dinosaurs.
Well, not that we know of for sure, right?
We haven't found the syringes in the fossil record.
We've got one last new dinosaur to mention this episode, and that's, I suppose in some way I'm saving the best for last, because it's a titanosaur.
Nice.
It's called Tiamat valdecii. It was published by Paulo Pereira and others in the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society. They named it based on 9 fragmentary tail bones, the beginning and middle of the tail.
Which sounds really unimpressive, but I guess for sauropods,
Yeah.
if you got the vertebrae, it can still work.
We'll take what we can get. And those middle tail bones had features that showed a lot of stability against shear loads, the forces going against it, and being able to move side to side.
Yeah, meaning resistance from being pushed from side to side.
There's possibly a titanosaur osteoderm that was described in 2018 that also belongs to this titanosaur. What's interesting is that osteoderm had large cavities, and it may mean that it was a source of calcium. There's still some debate about what titanosaurs used osteoderms for, because generally they were pretty large, so the armor didn't matter as much as, say, compared to an ankylosaur.
Yeah, and some animals use osteoderms not like Ankylosaur, big bumpy armor. Some of them just use it, like you were saying, to store nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's sort of a bone that you might not want to take a bunch of calcium out of your leg bones, for example, if you're a sauropod, because you don't want to weaken them. So if you have a separate place to store calcium, that could help.
So Tiamat helps show more diversity in the area where it was found and shed some light on early titanosaur radiation, like how they dispersed. It lived in the early Cretaceous in what is now Brazil. It was found in the Djadokhta Formation. It's the only dinosaur named from that formation because there's a lot of indeterminate fossils that have been found of Carnotaurus, maniraptors, megaraptors, rabachisaurids, spinosaurids, and other titanosaurs, and a lot of fish too. But now we have one dinosaur we can name. The genus name Tiamat refers to the snake or dragon goddess of Sumerian and Babylonian mythology. It usually represents the mother of mythical beings, and it refers to the dinosaur being a basal or early titanosaur. And the species name valdecii is in honor of Dr. Valdecii dos Santos Junior, who discovered the area where the fossils were found, also known as the type locality. So yeah, I'm always happy when I can sneak some sauropods into our episode.
Mm-hmm. So you got a sauropod that's extra early, and you also had your noasaurid, which was extra late in the early Cretaceous. Mix them up. Usually we're talking about titanosaurs in the late Cretaceous.
That's true. Which, speaking of sauropods, can actually mention another sauropod thing. I want to give a special thanks to RX7 for the special segment on dinosaur collective names in your podcast, Xenorama, the podcast of heroes and monsters. We had a fun time listening to that segment.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the special consideration for Brontosaurus and Ankylosaurus. So the idea is like, what do you call different groups of dinosaurs the way you would call like a pride of lions?
Yeah.
A murder of crows.
And we don't want to just go with flock for everything like you
Yes.
do with a lot of birds.
And the one that came up for Brontosaurus is Battle of Brontosauruses, which I think is excellent and kind of sounds like the name of a chapter in a book.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever finish my Dinosaur Wars book, 'cause that's been going on for many years now, that could be a chapter title.
It could be. It sounds very intense. Battles.
Yes.
Brontosaurus is battling.
There's also the August of Ankylosaurs.
Yeah, I was thinking it was going to be an armory of Ankylosaurus. I think would be a pretty solid name because they're all armored.
I like them both, though. The alliteration is nice, too.
Yeah, he came up with a ton of alliteration.
Yes. So thank you for thinking of us in this special segment. We'll get to our dinosaur of the day in just a moment, but first we're going to take another quick break for our sponsors. And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Mahakala, which was a request from Bo Davis via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. As I mentioned, it was kind of like a goose-like theropod. That's because it was a small halszkaraptorine dromaeosaurid theropod dinosaur that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. And that means that it was basically a semi-aquatic raptor.
Yeah, halszkaraptor, pretty famous for its swimming abilities.
Mm-hmm. Mahakala had large claws on its second toes, like other dromaeosaurids or raptors. It was small, though. It was estimated to be about 50 to 70 centimeters or 20 to 28 inches long and weigh 400 to 700 grams or 14 to 25 ounces.
Yeah, whenever the weights are in grams, I'm always surprised.
Right, because we're often talking about sauropods in the multi-tons.
Yeah, or at the very least kilograms.
Yes.
This thing is very much bird-sized, like you were saying a goose.
Right. In the paleoart, to me, it looked kind of like a goose. It's got the small head and beak, a long neck, but of course it's got a much longer tail and much bigger feet with those large sickle claws on them.
Yeah, and like the wings are smaller.
Yeah,
and
very
more
short
clawed.
arms.
Yeah, so less aquatic and flying looking, like a bird that's missing the parts it needs.
The type and only species is Mahakala omnogovae. It was named in 2007 by Turner and others. They found a partial skeleton of a nearly fully grown adult with skull bones, vertebrae, parts of the limbs, and parts of the pelvis and shoulder. And they found a well-preserved partial skull, and that skeleton was nearly complete. They found 20 preserved tail bones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So a pretty good tail on it then.
And as a halszkaraptorine, it may have been a good swimmer. It had some features that are seen in early troodontids and avialans, or birds. It had, like I mentioned, really short arms. The humerus is 50% the femur length. Most troodontids had relatively short arms, so it's kind of one of the features there. Being a basal dromaeosaurid, it means it's important for figuring out the ancestral size of dromaeosaurs. So it was kind of like a missing puzzle piece there. Because it was so small, that might help show that dinosaurs got smaller before they could fly, and that the ancestors of birds were small and pre-adapted for flight. And I feel like that's something we talk a lot about on this show, so maybe it doesn't sound like something new, but at the time, this was a newer idea.
So in other words, it was small for other reasons, and then flight was easier to evolve.
Yeah, or like just being small was a precursor for being able to fly. Before Mahakala was named, scientists thought that this miniaturization was only in the earliest birds, and that led to flight. But then we see, no, it was in the non-avian dinosaurs too. However, dromaeosaurids didn't uniformly shrink over time, and in some cases they did get larger. So this needs to be studied more to better understand what the limb proportions of Mahakala mean. The genus name Mahakala is for Mahakala, who's one of 8 protector deities in Tibetan Buddhism. And the species name omnogovae is for Omnogovae, which is a province in Mongolia. The fossils were found in 1992 during a joint American Museum of Natural History and Mongolian Academy of Sciences expedition. And it's the third dromaeosaurid reported from the Djadokhta Formation in Mongolia. It's possibly might be the 4th dromaeosaur, depending on if Velociraptor osmolskae is considered valid. That one was named in 2008, but paleontologists say it needs to be reassessed. Mahakala lived in a semi-arid climate with sand dunes and plains, so sometimes there was dust and sandstorms. Some other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include Velociraptor. Then you've got your oviraptors, like Oviraptor, as well as alvarsaurids, like Shibuya. Those are the strange dinosaurs with the typically functionally one finger. Ceratopsians, like Protoceratops. There's also hadrosaurs and ankylosaurs, and other animals that lived around the same time and place include turtles, crocodilians, lizards, and mammals.
And our fun fact of the day is that there are at least 3 dinosaur days.
Oh, I only know about 2 off the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, our friend and previous guest Brian Curtis did some digging on the origins of Dinosaur Day on his blog fossilcrates.com. And the earliest reference to International Dinosaur Day, that's one of the days, he could find was a Facebook page in 2015. Our podcast is then older than International Dinosaur Day.
Ooh.
Because it was earlier in 2015. According to the Facebook page, it was first celebrated on May 17th, 2016. And they gave the reason for May 17th in an explainer later saying, quote, International Dinosaur Day is on the 3rd Tuesday each May. This date was selected by teachers to encourage student interest in dinosaurs and the peripheral fields of science over the summer break. The 3rd Tuesday is after all the high-stakes testing and before the summer break from school, end quote.
Nice. So it's like, all right, we did the hard stuff. Now we can celebrate with dinosaurs and get you excited, and you should study and get excited about dinosaurs over your summer break.
Yeah, learn a little bit more and feel motivated to keep going and not just forget everything while you're gone for the summer. I've also seen some mentions like, oh, maybe they'll go to more museums and things like that. They also list a stated goal as to, quote, encourage student interest in science, all things fossilized, and certainly all things dinosaur, end quote.
Certainly.
Yep. The account which posted about this International Dinosaur Day has multiple posts about Florida, so it appears that the International Dinosaur Day was started in the US, specifically in Florida. The funny thing about the Facebook page is that the only post in the last 3 years is a link to Brian's blog post about the dinosaur days.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not the most active of pages, but it was fairly active around the time that International Dinosaur Day started, if it did in fact start in 2016. I also did some digging and couldn't find any earlier references than 2016. There's also National Dinosaur Day. Confusingly, both International and National Dinosaur Day are sometimes just shortened to Dinosaur Day.
Yes, those are the two I knew about.
Yeah. Both of these are completely unofficial. They are not recognized by any government or state that I can find, so they're just sort of a fun holiday. They're both on all sorts of holiday aggregation websites, though, which isn't too surprising because I'm guessing they all just steal from each other and pile up as many holidays as they possibly can.
Hey, I'm all for Dinosaur Day.
Yes. I don't think being listed on these sites is particularly impressive, though, because I think they'll just put anything on there. Just for the day this episode comes out, May 29th, it is supposedly a holiday for over a dozen different things. Here is a selection of some of them. It's National Alligator Day, National Snail Day, and World Otter Day.
Oh, lots of animals.
Just in the animal kingdom. In the food category, you've got National Biscuit Day and National Coq au vin Day. There's also just some other random stuff like National Flip Flop Day, Paperclip Day, Learn About Composting Day, and Put a Pillow on Your Fridge Day.
Because why not?
I guess it's supposed to bring you good luck, and it's a thing people do in the US. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
But according to these holiday websites, they say it's a thing. And that's all just May 29th. So not too surprising that 2 different days are related to dinosaurs with how popular dinosaurs are. So National Dinosaur Day, as opposed to International Dinosaur Day, National Dinosaur Day is celebrated on June 1st every year. I have no clue where that day comes from. One guess is that it may have something to do with Jurassic Park. The movie came out on June 11th, 1993, so maybe that's why they picked June. I don't know. Jurassic Park: The Lost World came out on May 19th, 1997, which is quite a bit closer to International Dinosaur Day. It's actually the third Monday in May that year, so it's just one day before what would later be International Dinosaur Day. It would have been funny if it was on National Dinosaur Day. Weirdly, multiple places say that National Dinosaur Day was inspired by or created for Jurassic Park 3 in the early 2000s, aka the noughties. But Jurassic Park 3 didn't come out anywhere near June 1st. It came out on July 18th. So unless there's some better evidence, I am very skeptical of the claim that Jurassic Park 3 has anything to do with National Dinosaur Day or that it even started in the noughties. The best guess that Brian Curtis came up with was from a blog post dated June 1st, 2016, titled Happy Dinosaur Day, June 1st.
Solid.
It's a post of mazes with dinosaurs drawn in them on maketoons.com. And if that is the first time someone mentioned the June 1st Dinosaur Day, it would be just 2 weeks after the first International Dinosaur Day, which would mean International Dinosaur Day had the precedent just barely.
I don't remember when we started being aware of the dinosaur days.
I don't either. It was probably more like 2019. That seems to be more like when it caught on. There's a couple companies in 2017 that I saw mentioning it. There's also lots of different museums and places who say, we celebrate Dinosaur Day on, it's just some random day. It's just because they did a dinosaur event and they just call it Dinosaur Day, but it's usually a one-off that they just did one time and not something they do every year. But there is one more Dinosaur Day that I need to mention.
Okay, what's this third one that I don't know?
It's May 7th, and it's Australia's National Dinosaur Day. So actually there are 2 National Dinosaur Days. There's one for an unknown country, and then there's another one for Australia. I don't know why it's May 7th. Again, there is a Facebook post for evidence. It also started in 2016, if that Facebook post is the earliest Australia National Dinosaur Day. I do think Jurassic Park might be related to all of these dinosaur days, but not the original Jurassic Park or Jurassic Park 3. I think it might have to do with Jurassic World, because Jurassic World came out in 2015, which definitely got a lot of people thinking about dinosaurs, being one of the top grossing movies. I think the top grossing movie of the year, maybe top 2.
I think the various anniversaries of Jurassic Park also got more people thinking about it in June.
Yeah, that's true. Jurassic World did come out in June, but my guess is that it takes a little while to plan a dinosaur day, and maybe that's why they started in 2016, the year after. For example, that International Dinosaur Day Facebook page talks about how they're going to do it next year. They put a little bit of effort into it beforehand. It wasn't just like, next week we're doing it. So that could be why 2016 was the year that a lot of these seem to start. But I don't know if that is the earliest date, and if any listeners know about the origins of International Dinosaur Day, National Dinosaur Day, or Australia's National Dinosaur Day, shoot us a message at bit.ly/dino questions, because we'd love to know.
Yeah, we haven't been able to figure it out yet.
It's really confusing. And whenever we're talking to other dinosaur creators about Dinosaur Day, they always say, which dinosaur day do you celebrate? Do you do the third one in May, the third Tuesday in May, or do you do June 1st?
We do as many as we can, but usually it's June 1st.
I think June 1st is a little appealing because it's always the same date. It's easy to remember June 1st. Figuring out the third Tuesday in May, slightly more complicated.
Like I remember last year it was May 15th, and around May 15th of this year I started thinking, has it been Dinosaur Day already?
Yep.
And then I looked it up and it was the 21st this year.
Yeah, it's about as late as it can get. Maybe it is as late as it can get. Yeah, because May 1st was a Wednesday. So you can't get any later than the 21st.
There we go. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Also, we would love for you to celebrate Dinosaur Day with us this Saturday, June 1st. We're doing a special live stream with a bunch of other podcasters, and you'll see some live fossil prep. There will be games. We'll be answering questions. You can register and learn all about it at bit.ly/dinoday24. Stay tuned. Next week, we will have at least one new dinosaur to talk about. Thanks again, and until next time.